My grief counselor suggested I try something new. 6 months after losing David, I'd spent every evening sitting in his study, surrounded by 40 years of memories and an emptiness that threatened to swallow me whole. That's when I met Natalie at our support group. She suggested a wellness retreat at the Serenity Springs Resort, just the two of us. A weekend to heal, she said. To move forward. During our first dinner at the resort's candlelit restaurant, while Natalie excused herself to take a call, the concierge slipped me a folded napkin. I opened it discreetly. The handwritten message made my blood run cold. Don't drink anything she gives you. I've seen her face before. You're in danger. So I ordered a pot of coffee and kept my cup close. I'm Dr. Helen Morrison, though I'd spent the last 3 months wondering if that title still meant anything. At 67, retirement wasn't supposed to feel like this. I'd helped hundreds of families navigate their darkest moments during my 40 years as a child psychologist. I'd written 2 books. I'd built a practice that meant something. But none of that prepared me for the silence in my house after David's heart attack. The way his coffee mug still sat in the cabinet. The way I'd reach for the phone to call him before remembering. My son Michael tried. He'd call from Boston every Sunday, his lawyer voice careful and measured. We'd talk about his cases, about his girlfriend Emma, about anything except how much we both missed Dad. Michael had inherited David's height and his logical mind, but he'd also inherited my stubbornness. When I told him I didn't want to be a burden, he'd protested. When I insisted I was fine, he'd believed me because it was easier than pushing. The grief support group met every Tuesday evening at St. Catherine's Church. I'd resisted for months before finally walking through those doors. The folding chairs arranged in a circle, the weak coffee in styrofoam cups, the careful way people avoided eye contact until they were ready to share. That's where I met Natalie Graham on a rainy evening in October. She was younger than most of us, maybe mid-40s, with the kind of effortless elegance that made you sit up straighter. Auburn hair swept into a loose bun, minimal makeup that somehow made her green eyes more striking. She spoke about losing her husband to cancer 3 years ago, and the way she described the loneliness afterward, it was like she'd been reading my diary. After the meeting, she approached me. Her smile was warm but not pushy. We talked for 20 minutes in the parking lot, while rain drummed on my car. She asked about my work, seemed genuinely fascinated by child psychology. Before I left, she suggested coffee sometime. I surprised myself by saying yes. Over the next 6 weeks, Natalie became what I needed without realizing I needed it. She'd text me articles about mindfulness. We'd meet for lunch at quiet restaurants, where she'd listen to my rambling stories about David with perfect patience. She never pushed, never pried, but somehow knew exactly when to ask deeper questions. She mentioned she was a life coach specializing in grief counseling, which explained her insight. One Thursday afternoon over tea at her apartment, she suggested the retreat, Serenity Springs Resort, a boutique spa hotel in the Berkshires known for its healing programs. Just a weekend, she said, a chance to reset. She'd been there before and found it transformative. When I hesitated, she touched my hand gently. I deserve peace, she said. Don't I want to feel like myself again? I thought about my empty house, the way I'd started talking to David's photograph on the mantel, the night I'd set 2 places for dinner before catching myself. Maybe she was right. Maybe I needed to do something different. Michael seemed relieved when I told him about the trip. It sounded healthy, he said. Good that I was making friends. He offered to pay for the weekend as an early birthday present, which should have made me happy. Instead, it made me realize how worried he'd been. Natalie drove us up on Friday afternoon in late November. Her silver Mercedes handled the winding mountain road smoothly while she chatted about the resort's amenities. Hot stone massage, meditation gardens, farm-to-table cuisine. She'd booked us adjoining rooms with mountain views. When I reached for my wallet at check-in, she waved me off. Her treat, she insisted. I'd get the next one. The resort was stunning. Rustic elegance with exposed beams and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Berkshire Mountains, dusted with early snow. Our rooms were down a quiet corridor on the 3rd floor, decorated in soothing earth tones. Natalie suggested we freshen up and meet for dinner at 7. I unpacked slowly, hanging my clothes in the closet with the kind of care that had nothing to do with wrinkles and everything to do with settling my nerves. Something felt off. though I couldn't articulate what. Maybe it was the way Natalie had asked the front desk about my room number before we went upstairs. Maybe it was how she'd lingered in my doorway, eyes scanning the space like she was cataloging exits. Or maybe I was just being paranoid, a hazard of spending 40 years analyzing behavior. The restaurant was intimate, maybe 15 tables with crisp white linens and soft piano music. Natalie had requested a corner table with views of the terrace. She looked lovely in a simple black dress, diamond studs catching the candlelight. We ordered wine. She insisted on choosing a bottle, something special, she said. I typically didn't drink much anymore, but the atmosphere was lovely, and I found myself relaxing. That's when I noticed the concierge. He was probably mid-40s, with silver threading through dark hair and the kind of alert eyes that suggested he saw everything happening in his hotel. He'd helped with our bags earlier, and I'd tipped him generously. Now, he was standing near the restaurant entrance, and when our eyes met, his expression shifted. Not recognition exactly, something more like concern. Natalie excused herself to take a phone call. Needed to check on a client, she said with an apologetic smile. The moment she stepped onto the terrace, the concierge approached. His name tag read Carlos. He moved quickly but casually, like he wasn't doing anything unusual. When he reached our table, he set down a fresh napkin, his body blocking the security camera's view of his hands. I felt paper beneath the linen. My heart rate kicked up as I discreetly unfolded it. The message was handwritten in blue ink. Don't drink anything she gives you. I've seen her face before. You're in danger. Order coffee and keep your cup close. I'll explain later. My hands went cold. I looked up, but Carlos was already walking away, stopping at another table to ask about their meal. Professional, normal. Except my world had just tilted sideways. Through the window, I could see Natalie on her phone. Her body language had changed. Tense, aggressive. Nothing like the gentle friend I'd known for 6 weeks. My psychologist training kicked in, the part of me that had spent decades reading people. I cataloged the evening again with new eyes. The way she'd insisted on choosing the wine. The way she'd positioned herself between me and the rest of the restaurant. The way she'd asked about my evening medication when we'd talked earlier, claiming she was curious about what doctors prescribed for grief-related insomnia. The way she'd mentioned I should let Michael know we had spotty cell service up here, just so he wouldn't worry if he couldn't reach me. Red flags I'd missed because I was lonely, because I'd wanted a friend so badly I'd ignored my instincts. Natalie returned with that warm smile back in place. Sorry about that, she said. Work emergency. She reached for the wine bottle to refill my barely touched glass. I did something I'd never done before in my life. I lied with complete conviction. Actually, I said, I was thinking about switching to coffee. The wine was giving me a headache. Would she mind? Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Disappointment? Frustration? Then the smile was back. Of course not, she said. Whatever I preferred. She caught the waiter's attention and ordered a pot of coffee. For both of us, she added. She'd join me. The coffee arrived in a silver pot. Natalie poured 2 cups, added cream to hers. I waited, watching. She lifted her cup, sipped, kept eye contact. See, her expression said. Perfectly safe. I added cream to mine, lifted it, pretended to drink while barely letting the liquid touch my lips. My mind raced. What was I supposed to do? What was Carlos talking about? Was I overreacting to a well-meaning warning about someone he'd mistaken for someone else? But no. Everything in my professional training was screaming that something was wrong. The atmosphere had shifted. Natalie's attention felt different now. Focused. Predatory. We finished dinner. She suggested a nightcap in the lounge. Maybe some herbal tea. The resort's blend was supposed to promote deep sleep, she said. I begged off, claiming exhaustion. She walked me to my room, lingered at the door. Sleep well, she said. Tomorrow we have our massage appointments. You're going to feel like a new person. I locked the door behind me and stood there shaking. Pulled out my phone. Spotty service, just like Natalie had predicted. 1 bar. I tried calling Michael, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted instead. If you don't hear from me by tomorrow night, I'm at Serenity Springs Resort in the Berkshires. Room 307. Please check on me. Then I waited. 5 minutes felt like an hour. Finally, a soft knock at my door. I looked through the peephole. Carlos, the concierge. I opened the door just enough to talk. He glanced down the hallway before speaking quietly. Could he come in? Just for a moment? It was important. Everything in my training told me letting a strange man into my hotel room was a terrible idea. Everything in my gut said to trust him. I let him in. Carlos moved to the window, kept his voice low. He'd been a detective before, he said. 20 years with the Massachusetts State Police before retiring to something quieter. 2 months ago, he'd seen a news report about a woman wanted for questioning in Connecticut. Eleanor Vance, they'd called her then. Different hair color, different name, but the same face, same green eyes, same elegant way of moving. She'd befriended an elderly widower, convinced him she was a grief counselor. 6 weeks later, he was dead. Heart attack, the death certificate said. Except his daughter had questions. Found emails suggesting her father was changing his will. By the time police got involved, Eleanor Vance had disappeared. Similar pattern in Rhode Island before that, and New Hampshire. Always wealthy widows or widowers in grief support groups. Always quick friendships. Always sudden deaths that looked natural. Always questions about changed wills or missing valuables. But never enough evidence for an arrest. I felt sick. How many? I asked. Carlos met my eyes. At least 4 that police suspected. Maybe more, they hadn't connected yet. Why hadn't he called the police immediately? He had, he said. When I checked in this afternoon, and he recognized Natalie, he'd contacted his old partner, but it was Friday evening. Jurisdiction was complicated, and they needed concrete evidence. He'd been watching all evening, and when Natalie went outside, when she'd done something to my wine glass, he'd seen enough. We needed to record her confession. I laughed bitterly. Right, I said. I'd just ask if she was planning to murder me. Actually, Carlos said, I could do exactly that. My background was psychology. I knew how to ask questions, and he had something that might help. He pulled out a small device from his jacket, professional recording equipment from his detective days. If I wore it tomorrow, if I could get her talking, it was insane. It was dangerous. It was the only way to stop her from doing this to someone else. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. At one point, I heard footsteps stop outside my door. The handle turned slightly, testing the lock. Then, silence. In the morning, I found a handwritten note slipped under my door. Good morning. Meet me for breakfast at 9? We have so much healing ahead of us today. And the cheerful tone made my skin crawl. Carlos met me in the lobby at 8:30. Showed me how to wear the recording device, a thin wire that ran under my sweater. Reminded me to stay in public spaces. Keep the conversation natural. If I felt unsafe, say the word meditation, and he'd intervene immediately. I found Natalie in the sunlit breakfast room. She'd saved me a seat by the windows. Already ordered herbal tea for both of us. My special blend, she said. From a shop in Vermont, much better than what the resort served. I thanked her, but flagged down the waiter. Actually, could I get coffee? That tea last night had been too strong. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, she said. Whatever I preferred. We ate breakfast. Talked about our plans. Natalie seemed distracted, checking her watch. When I suggested taking a walk in the gardens before our massage, she agreed quickly. Maybe too quickly. The gardens were beautiful but empty this late in November. Most of the flowers were dormant, but the evergreens and stone pathways created a peaceful labyrinth. Natalie led us to a bench far from the main building. Private, she said. A good place to talk. This was it. I thought about David, about Michael, about all the people Natalie had already hurt. I took a breath and began. I'd been thinking, I said, about what she'd said about moving forward, about new chapters. And I'd been wondering, what did she think about people who reinvent themselves? People who become someone new after tragedy? Natalie's eyes sharpened. What did I mean? Well, I said carefully. After David died, I'd felt like my old life was over. Sometimes I thought about selling everything, disappearing, starting fresh somewhere nobody knew me. Had she ever felt that way? She studied me for a long moment, then something shifted in her expression. Oh, Helen, she said softly. I think I've been that way for longer than you know. My heart pounded. I kept my voice gentle, curious, professional. What did she mean? Natalie leaned back, said she'd told a small lie. Her husband hadn't died of cancer. He'd left her, emptied their accounts, and disappeared with a younger woman. She'd been alone at 40 with nothing. No money, no dignity, no future. So she'd learned to survive, she continued. Learned that the world was full of people with more than they needed. People so desperate for connection they'd believe anything. People like me. I felt cold, but kept my expression neutral. Like her? Like me, she confirmed. Wealthy widow, successful career, probably a healthy life insurance policy and investments. Adult child too busy with his own life to pay close attention. Perfect target, she said, almost admiringly. How many others? I asked quietly. She smiled. Enough. Each one easier than the last. Support groups were hunting grounds. Grief made people stupid, made them ignore obvious red flags, made them drink tea they shouldn't drink. What was in the tea? I needed her to say it. Natalie tilted her head. Does it matter? Something natural. Something that would stop a weak heart. Something that would look like grief finally caught up with a sad, lonely widow. Everyone would understand. Even my devoted son, Michael, who'd probably feel guilty for not visiting more. And then what? I asked. She'd inherit? She laughed. Not inherit. That takes time. But I'd already started helping with my finances, hadn't I? Online access to my accounts, which I'd mentioned needed updating. Signature on some insurance forms, which she'd offered to witness. Power of attorney documents for my own protection, which we'd discuss later this weekend. Small pieces, she said. Enough to transfer what she needed before anyone noticed. She'd be gone before Michael realized his mother's accounts were empty. Another grieving friend who'd tried so hard to help, but ultimately moved away to deal with her own healing. I was shaking. How did she live with herself? Natalie's expression hardened. The same way those elderly targets lived with their wealth while others struggled. The same way people like David lived comfortable lives while she'd had to fight for every scrap. She wasn't the villain here. She was just better at playing the game. Except this time, I said quietly, the game was over. Her eyes narrowed. What did I mean? I meant Carlos, the concierge, was a former detective. I meant Massachusetts State Police had been looking for Eleanor Vance. I meant every word she'd just said had been recorded. I meant it was over. For a second, genuine fear flashed across Natalie's face. Then rage. She lunged forward, grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise. You stupid woman, she hissed. You think they'll get here in time? You think I'll let you testify? I said the word meditation. Carlos appeared from behind a row of evergreens. Not alone, 2 state troopers with him. Natalie's hand was still on my wrist when they reached us. She knew there was nowhere to run. The fight left her body all at once, replaced by cold calculation. She'd need a lawyer, she said. She wanted to make a deal. The next hours blurred. Statements at the police station. Phone calls to Michael, who drove up immediately, angry and scared and guilty all at once. Tests at the local hospital, where they confirmed traces of digoxin in my bloodstream from the tea I'd barely sipped. Enough to be dangerous. Not quite enough to kill. Not yet. The investigation moved quickly once they had Natalie in custody. Her real name was Natalie Graham, and she had a record going back 15 years. Fraud, forgery, one suspicious death in Florida that was being reopened. The woman from Connecticut, the man from Rhode Island, 2 others from New Hampshire. Each one a lonely, wealthy person who died suddenly after befriending her. Carlos found evidence in her hotel room. Multiple identities, forged documents, a ledger with names and amounts. My name was there, Helen Morrison, Est, $2, 3M, timeline, 8 weeks. I'd been a project, a calculation, a number in a ledger. Michael stayed with me through all of it. We talked more honestly than we had in months. About Dad, about my loneliness, about his guilt, about the fact that I'd almost died because I'd been too proud to admit I needed help. He cried. I cried. We started to heal something that had been broken between us. The trial came 8 months later. Natalie's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim of circumstance, poverty, abuse, bad choices compounded by desperation. But the recording was damning. Her own words about hunting grounds and stupid targets and stopping weak hearts. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. 25 years. Federal prison. She'd be 70 before she was eligible for parole. I testified at the sentencing, looked her in the eye, and told the judge about the 4 confirmed victims who couldn't speak for themselves, about the families destroyed, about the trust she'd violated. She stared back at me with empty eyes, like I was a business deal that hadn't worked out. Carlos came to the trial, sat in the back row every day. Afterward, I asked why he'd risked so much to help me. He could have just called police and let them handle it. He'd lost his mother to a con artist, he said. Different scheme, but the same exploitation of loneliness and grief. He'd become a detective, partly because of that. When he'd seen Natalie at the resort, seen her with me, he couldn't just watch it happen again. I wanted to thank him properly. He tried to refuse, but I insisted. I set up a scholarship fund in his name at the police academy. $50,000 for recruits interested in elder fraud investigation. He cried when I told him. But more than that, Carlos became a friend, the real kind this time. He introduced me to his wife, Teresa, who'd been worried sick during those 2 days. We had dinner at their house once a month. His teenage daughter, Sophia, was interested in psychology, and I found myself mentoring her the way I'd mentored students years ago. 2 years later, I'm sitting in my study, but it doesn't feel empty anymore. David's photograph still sits on the mantle, but I've added others. Carlos and Teresa, Michael and Emma, who got engaged last spring, Sophia at her high school graduation. I started volunteering with the Senior Fraud Prevention Coalition. I give talks at community centers and support groups, share my story, teach people to recognize the red flags I'd missed. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Loneliness makes us vulnerable, but asking for help makes us strong. Last month, I got a letter from a woman in Oregon. She'd heard my talk online, recognized the pattern in her own life. A new friend pushing too hard, asking too many questions about finances. She'd contacted police. They'd investigated, stopped another Natalie before anyone got hurt. That's when I understood what happened to me. The fear and the danger and the betrayal, it had purpose. Not because I deserved it, but because I survived it. Because I could use my experience to protect others. Michael calls every Sunday still. But now he also visits twice a month, brings Emma and her homemade lasagna. We talk about his cases and my volunteer work and plans for their wedding next fall. We talk about Dad too, but the grief has softened into something gentler. Memory instead of loss. I still attend the grief support group at Street Catherine's. Different now, though. I'm not looking for someone to fill the emptiness. I'm there to share what I've learned, to watch for people who might be vulnerable, to be the friend I wish I'd had instead of the friend I thought I'd found. Last Tuesday, a new woman joined the circle. Young, elegant, asking careful questions. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I'd never stop being watchful. But when she approached me after the meeting, suggested coffee sometime, I smiled kindly and said I'd think about it. Then I watched where she went next, who she talked to, how she positioned herself. And when I got home, I called Carlos, just to check, just to be sure, because that's what survival looks like. Not fearful, but aware. Not closed off, but careful. Not bitter, but wise. Natalie was right about one thing. Grief had changed me, but not in the way she'd expected. It hadn't made me weak or stupid or desperate. It had made me someone who could spot predators in grief support group parking lots. Someone who could trust her instincts even when her heart wanted to ignore them. Someone who could turn tragedy into purpose. The house doesn't feel empty anymore. My life doesn't feel over. And when I look at David's photograph now, I can hear what he'd say. That I survived. That I helped others. That I took the worst thing that almost happened to me and made it count for something. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.